Frozen 2 is out and breaking all kinds of records. It's looking to be yet another billion-dollar success for Disney in 2019, which is no surprise. The Frozen franchise is probably Disney's biggest at this point. But from a critical standpoint, the consensus is that while Frozen 2 is a good movie, it just isn't as good as the first Frozen. And I have to agree with that opinion. Actually, I'll go one step further, and I'll also agree with the theory that Frozen 2 probably has no reason to exist beyond making money. You see, these days, Disney is almost synonymous with sequels, remakes, and general retreading. We have Frozen 2 out this month, and we had Ralph Breaks the Internet last year. There's also the endless flood of remakes that effortlessly make a ton of money with each installment. Throw in Pixar's recent sequel binge, and you have a company derided as unoriginal. To be clear, I don't agree that Disney is out of ideas. After all, Frozen itself was an original movie from 2013, and that's not all. Look at how many successful original movies they had in the past decade. The 2010s were truly a reawakening of Disney's original animation studio, Walt Disney Animation. I mean, how can you look at Moana and Zootopia being released in the same year as anything other than a sign of creativity? And as bad as Disney's sequelitis has become, they're still way better off than the competition. Look at Despicable Me, which has had as much installments in 9 years as Toy Story had in 24. The truth is, sequels have become a Hollywood mainstay. So why should Disney be any different? I certainly don't blame them for catering to current tastes. Finding Dory and Incredibles 2, for example, made $1 billion each. I'm not gonna get into remakes much, but it seems each of those makes $1 billion too. Retreading old successes is, unfortunately, proven to work. But ironically, that financial success comes at a price. The question here is, how is the Disney brand affected by the reliance on the past? Now let me be clear, my problem isn't that Disney is making bad sequels. The theatrical sequels are very well made. My problem is rather that they've moved away from the company's original brand values of progress and innovation. Disney being a sequel-obsessed company is a relatively new development. This is an analysis of Disney's relationship with sequels over the years, and how relying on past successes has led the company astray, for better or worse. This is about sequels and retreads, but I'm not going to talk about Marvel or Lucasfilm here, as those are different studios where sequels are expected, and really part and parcel of those franchises. No, this is mainly about the core Disney studio and the company that owns it. From its beginning in 1923, the Disney company rarely did sequels, if at all. Walt and his team made sure that each short they created was something different than the last. And when Walt sensed he was being boxed in with the Mickey cartoons, he actually started a new series called Silly Symphonies, specifically made to be a completely different experience every time. It was almost like an anthology series, where him and his team could experiment with different animation techniques and storylines. It wasn't until 1933 that sequels came up in discussion. Disney first tried sequels with a famous Silly Symphony, The Three Little Pigs. The short was amazingly popular upon release, and is still one of the most famous Disney cartoons. It made such an impact that Walt was pressured to make more cartoons starring the pigs. Now, Walt didn't like the idea of retreading an old success. The Silly Symphonies were specifically made to feature new stories and characters in each cartoon. Still, distributors wanted more pigs, and he was pressured to release a sequel the following year. In 1934, The Big Bad Wolf did well enough in the box office, but it was nowhere near as successful. That's going to be a recurring theme throughout this video. Anyway, the Disney studio would make 2 more sequels to The Three Little Pigs in the 1930s, called The Three Little Wolves and Practical Pig. And though they were very well made, and relatively well received by audiences, none made a big impact. They were quickly forgotten. Walt's intuition that sequels were a bad idea was proven to be true, and he disavowed them entirely, famously saying, "You can't top pigs with pigs." The Three Little Pigs series set the tone for the Disney company regarding sequels, /remakes, /reboots. During Walt's lifetime, the company made no sequels, even for its most popular movies. And to be honest, sequels in general weren't very common back in the golden age of Hollywood anyway. The biggest films of all time never got sequels, and Disney was no exception. See, the Disney animations were immensely successful at the time, so the studio would have had a lot to gain from a Snow White 2 or a Pinocchio 2, for example. But those were never made. There was also never a continuation of Dumbo's circus career. It just wasn't needed. Walt kept the company focused on new projects, constantly innovating instead of relying on past successes. Case in point, a few years after The Three Little Pigs, Snow White was the first feature-length animated picture. Producing it was a massive undertaking, and would have killed the company if it failed. Instead, it became the highest-grossing film ever upon release. Walt's first thought was to move to something completely different, so Snow White led to Pinocchio, and then Fantasia, and so on and so forth. Each feature film was a completely different experience, with completely different tones, and often innovating in both animation and story. And they didn't limit themselves to just feature animated films. After the war, the studio moved into live-action movies, and then TV, and nature documentaries in the following years. In 1955, Disneyland opened. Thanks to the futuristic idea of a theme park, and the care and detail that Disney and his Imagineers put into the park itself, the company was synonymous with innovation in Walt's time. It wasn't to last, however. After Walt's death, the studio slowly got around to sequels, but only occasional ones, for the live-action films, like the Herbie and the Witch Mountain series. The 70s and 80s weren't the most successful decades for Disney, but they still managed to avoid sequels. They instead re-released their past movies every few years, which was an industry standard before home video. During these hard years, though, the rest of Hollywood rapidly adopted sequels as an important moneymaker. After Jaws released in 1973, the concept of sequels caught a lot of steam, and the 80s proved how big continuous sequels could be. Look no further than series like Star Wars, or Superman, or Rambo. Lots of installments in small spans of time. This change in taste towards sequels didn't take hold at Disney until the 90s, when they realized what they could do with their franchises. It wasn't until 1990 that Disney released their first theatrical animated sequel, The Rescuers Down Under. If that seems a little weird to you, The First Rescuers was Disney's biggest hit since Walt died, so that was a big reason why they greenlit the sequel. I do agree it's still a peculiar choice for such an important milestone, but whatever. The movie came out the year after The Little Mermaid started the Disney Renaissance, and right before Beauty and the Beast. Looking at the Disney of this era, I can't help but feel Rescuers 2 was a mistake. It wasn't a bad movie, but I strongly feel that Disney wanted a surefire hit after Oliver and Company only made decent returns in 1988. There was a feeling in the studio that Little Mermaid wouldn't be a hit, so I can see why Down Under was produced. The Little Mermaid did extremely well though, which meant Disney kind of spoke too soon with the sequel to Rescuers. Down Under was the smallest success of the Renaissance, which didn't really help the case for sequels that much. Regardless, the dam had been broken. Home video was gaining steam around this time, so Disney produced a sequel to Aladdin in 1994. It made around $300 million, so Disney opened the floodgates. Disney Toon Studios released countless direct-to-video sequels and prequels over the 90s and early 2000s. You would not believe some of the choices made here. Cinderella II? Fox and the Hound 2? It seemed like every animated classic was a candidate for a sequel or remake or whatever. Now, don't get too confused. These had nothing to do with Walt Disney Animation, the main studio. These sequels were made by Disney Toons, the C team of the company. That meant very small budgets and general inattention. As you might expect, most of these were barely decent, and some were downright bad. The smaller budgets really showed in the animation too. However lame these direct-to-video sequels were though, they were mere sideshows. They weren't made by Walt Disney Animation Studios, the flagship of the company. Only a few are even considered canon to their parent movies. The rest are very easy to ignore. Disney Toons' output sold great, but they also established Disney's reputation for soulless sequels, which continues to haunt them to this day. John Lasseter agreed, and when he took control of Disney Animation in 2006, he cancelled the sequel trend. Sadly, the damage was done, and sequels had become mainstream. They would soon start to seep in to Disney's theatrical productions as well. The main studio, Walt Disney Animation, didn't release another theatrical sequel until Fantasia 2000. The original Fantasia is a masterpiece of art and sound, universally known as Walt's most ambitious movie. I'll go out on a limb and say that the segmented nature of Fantasia makes a sequel believable. In fact, one of Walt Disney's original ideas with the movie was to continuously release it with different segments. Sadly, that idea was a bit too ambitious for its time. In any case, Fantasia 2000 didn't come close to its parent success. It barely broke even financially, and is considered just fine critically. After 2000, Disney stopped theatrical animated sequels for almost 20 years. During that time span, the company bought up Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm, and also discovered the goldmine that would be live-action remakes of past animated movies. In the span of a few years, Disney became the biggest studio in Tinseltown. Hollywood as a whole started leaning into franchises more than ever. The changing tastes meant that Disney saw sequels as a big opportunity. The next Disney theatrical sequel was Ralph Breaks the Internet, which came out last year. This is the first theatrical sequel that made more money than the original. And critically, it was on par with the original as well. I liked Ralph 2 quite a bit, but not more than the first. I agree that it was a very popular movie, but it just wasn't impactful. There was a general feeling that there wasn't much of a need for the movie beyond, well, money. It didn't help that it was released just before Into the Spider-Verse, a vastly more innovative and memorable movie. This year marks the first time Disney released a sequel in consecutive years. When Frozen became the most successful animated movie ever in 2013, it was guaranteed a sequel in today's environment. Well, we got it this month, and it's looking to be another mega hit. It might even gross more than the original. But from a critical standpoint, it doesn't look like it's as good as the first one, which at this point is expected of sequels in general. On the Pixar side, sequels have the same issue. Their sequels and prequels make a ton of money, and are genuinely good movies. But they're just that. Good movies. Nothing to write home about. Only the Toy Story series has kept consistent financial and critical success over all 4 releases. But Toy Story is an exception. Not just a Disney exception, but a cinema exception. The others share the same fate. Just good. That trend with all these sequels reminds me of Walt saying, "You really can't top pigs with pigs." At least for Disney, sequels have never surpassed the original. even in the rare case when more money is made, the sequel isn't as good critically, and isn't as memorable. Again, that's not to say that they're bad. Far from it. Each is made with the quality you would expect from Disney or Pixar. Still, new ground is never broken. Last year, the Oscar for Best Animated Picture went to Spider-Verse. It totally deserved the award, but for me, the real story was how much of an afterthought the Disney and Pixar nominations were.
Ralph Breaks the Internet, Rich Moore, Phil Johnston, and Clark Spencer. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Bob Persichetti, Peter Ramsey, Rodney Rothman, Phil Lord, and Christopher Miller.
I'm the biggest Disney fan around, but I can honestly say that if Spider-Verse didn't win, I would have picked Isle of Dogs as my second choice. And then Incredibles 2 or Mirai. Ralph Breaks the Internet would be my last choice. That reality does not sit well with me. Disney should be at the forefront of animation, not stay content with pre-existing properties. The funny thing is, in the 2013 awards, the exact opposite happened, when Brave won at the expense of the first Ralph movie. The Academy got it right in 2019, but this time Ralph still lost. The poor guy just can't catch a break. From the beginning, Walt Disney aimed his company at continually opening new doors and doing new things. That's how we got masterpieces like Pinocchio and Fantasia, after Snow White did so well. But it's also how we got the very idea of a Disney theme park, of a nature documentary, of color TV. Walt kept his company moving forward. Today, Disney's less innovative and more iterative. They don't enter new industries or mediums as much as they did decades ago. Disney Plus is probably the most impactful new thing they've done in quite a long time. The company is a financial powerhouse, but it's stagnated creatively. I could go deeper into how complacence has affected the company as a whole, but that's a video for another day. Recently, Hollywood has been consumed by remakes and sequels. Disney is following the trend, but there's still reason to be optimistic. Both Disney Animation and Pixar still release original movies. Thankfully, these movies are really good. Each one breaks new ground, introduces interesting characters, and tells moving stories. But they show no signs of stopping either. Between the two studios, there are 3 original movies coming out next year. That said, I highly doubt Walt's philosophy of moving forward will take root at the company anytime soon. Still, we can at least take comfort in the fact that originality remains alive in some form, and reward that originality when it appears. So what do you think of Disney's turn to sequels? Do you see them when they open in theaters? I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe for more Disney videos. Well, that's all I have for now. Be sure and have yourself a great day, and I'll see you later.